Looking for a guaranteed way to create content that resonates with your audience? Start a podcast. Interview your ideal clients and let them choose the topic of the interview. Because if your ideal clients care about the topic, there's a good chance the rest of your audience will care about it too. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I am your host for today's episode, Nikki Ivy with Sweetfish Media. Guys, I've got with me today LB Harvey, who is SVP of Sales and Success at Intercom. LB, how you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Happy Wednesday.
Yeah, hump day. I'm pushing through. We're almost over the hump. I'm super excited to talk to you today. We're going to be talking about one of my favorite things to nerd out on, which is how to scale a sales team from very early stage on up. And you've got 3 key areas of focus that you were going to lay out for us. But before we get to any of that, I'd love it if you would just give us a little bit of background on yourself and what you and the folks at Intercom have been up to these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined Intercom 3 years ago to run our sales and success efforts. I joined from LinkedIn, where I was at for 7 years of my career, joining as an IC and individual contributor, and then building out our first SDR organization, and then moving up to managing more senior teams, and finally finishing out leading our North America acquisition team across SMB and enterprise. I started my career at a company called Corporate Executive Board, where I actually started as an outbound SDR, which is still one of my favorite jobs across my whole career. So Intercom has been a fabulous ride thus far, and it's been really, really, really cool to see the company evolve. When I joined, we just raised our Series B funding. We were beneath $50 million in revenue, and across the last 3 years, we've really been focusing on building out and growing for scale.
And now you're going to tell us how. Thanks for that. I think it's really interesting that you would say that your favorite role has been as an outbound SDR. I spent a lot of time as an outbound. I say a lot. It's a lot in SDR years, right? A lot of time as an outbound SDR as well. And it's some of my favorite as well. So I'd be interested to know first why you say that, how some of your experience at LinkedIn informed your approach to scaling a sales team in general and the team that you're working with here at Intercom. And then we'll get into some of the 3 key areas of focus.
Great. Yeah. So the reason I say it's one of my favorite jobs is I just think like when you distill down what is the essence of sales, I just feel like the outbound SDR role is so much, like what true sales is. It teaches you a couple of really key things. One, I think there's an absolute discipline to sales of being able to come in and organize and prioritize your day to have the most impact. And so what I love about outbound SDR is it really teaches you to kind of organize your call list, do the required research to have a good hook when you actually get someone live, research the company and write a really compelling email. So it really focuses on sort of that like daily discipline, time prioritization, and then the ability to find something that is unique to a person or a company that's going to get their attention and start to sell them on why your product or solution might have very real business impact for them. So
exactly.
It's really kind of like, focusing on that skill of like, why you, why now? Like, why should you talk to me and how can I help you and your company or your business? And then it also just really teaches a lot of fundamentals about time prioritization, which I think is great.
Yeah, and you find that on a sales team, if there are individuals who maybe didn't get that experience, even if they're super talented or strategic about the other parts of the sales process, right? The closing and the demo and things like that. If they didn't have the discipline to get that first part right as an SDR, it's still going to be, detrimental in a career. And so you're a woman after my own heart, LB. But let's get into it.
Yeah.
So when you joined Intercom and when you think about scaling a sales team from early stage on up to the kind of success that you guys have seen, you said there are 3 key areas of focus. What are those and which one did you start with?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of pieces that are really key. I think one is you got to make sure that you have kind of the right talent on the bus and you got the right folks who can sell in new and different ways. The second is you've got to invest in a strategic sales operations organization. I'm a big believer in that. And then I think third, you have to start thinking about some of the rocks or priorities you want to drive across the sales organization that are really going to help accelerate you in the right areas. So I actually started first and foremost here with making sure that we had kind of the right sellers with the right mentality here with us. And I think very early in the days of Intercom, we had a sales team that was really customer centric, which is great. We still want to have that component and sort of like that ethos here. But I don't know that each and every person was really excited about being truly commercially oriented and having more of kind of a hunter mentality. And so kind of the first thing we really did was come in and sort of recalibrate expectations and make sure that we had folks who weren't afraid to be kind of, on the court each day, competitive, wanted to see customers successful and be really customer centric in their approach, but we're also not afraid to bring in a little bit of that challenger mentality and look within their book of business and figure out, how to grow it essentially. And so that was a really big area of focus of just sort of like setting the new lay of the land and making sure that people were excited to sign up for this next evolution of what the sales team was going to look like.
Now that seems tough because what you're describing is really hard to measure or predict on paper, right? So that's like a whole other podcast in itself is how to know that you're hiring someone who does have that hunter mentality. Now, part of the way you could do that is, looking for the type of experience that you and I talked about, right? Have they proven that they have the discipline to stay in a role that required them to do that kind of outreach and research and really hunt? But beyond that, how does intuition or just talent or things like that play into the formula for trying to find those people?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, when you're trying to go out and find those types of folks, really digging into their experience and asking some of those kind of layering questions, just like you would in a sales process, are really important. So really understanding if people have any outbound experience, understanding, their deal size and transaction, asking them about how they set up their day and prioritize. I think those are some of the questions that you can ask to really understand like the how someone gets to the number that they're asked to get to. And then I think asking questions that get at whether someone has that kind of daily discipline, that kind of grit and resilience. Mm-hmm. I love to ask people to give me an example of where they've failed in a deal and what did they learn from it and how have they changed their approach. I think asking a lot of those layering questions becomes really important. And then also, by the way, to be really clear on the expectations of the role and to make it clear that, and actually this is like has very real-time application. Here at Intercom, we're starting to build out a serious outbound muscle. We've been 100% inbound driven for a long time. And, as we move up market, we want an SDR organization and we want AEs that can go out and actually outbound and bring deals to us. And we want an account management or what we call relationship management team that can take a small deal and actually go out and kind of outbound within the organization to other teams or business units or navigate to senior folks within that org to expand our footprint there. And so I think just really being open and honest and clear about what it's going to take to be successful at the company is really important. I think sometimes we get a little overly caught up on like selling the role. And I think every recruitment process is really kind of a two-way evaluation, and you don't lose anything by making sure that people are really signed up for the job and what it's going to require.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. I tend toward that methodology myself when I think about how the types of teams that I'm going to join. And I can tell you, I hear it in your voice that this drive, this killer instinct, dare I say. I know we're not supposed to say stuff like that in sales anymore, but it is in hustle porn. It is real. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
No porn, just hustle. But so once you've gotten those people and you've placed the right sort of folks in place on the team, what's next?
Yeah. So one big change and move we made here is we went into what's traditionally called a hunter-farmer model. So we got away from a blended role where someone would sell new accounts and then own that in kind of perpetuity. Mm-hmm. And we went into a model where we had a group of folks that were responsible for bringing an initial deal across the line. And then they would flip it over to what we call, and those are our account executives. And then we have a team called our relationship managers that are responsible for taking that deal and essentially ensuring that they're successful enough to renew and that they then continue to expand with us as well. And I think to really make this model or any sort of segmentation strategy work, you've got to invest in strategic sales operations. So that is a team that I kind of went about building out. And at this point, we've got a core ops team that drives a lot of the sort of segmentation work, quota on commission work, a lot of the numerical analysis. If we want to run an A/B test, that's the team that drives it. We also have a sales enablement team that's responsible for making sure that our sellers are well trained and onboarded, that they're up to speed on any company-wide changes changes to our purchase flow or updates within our product. And they just really make sure that our team is ready to provide an awesome customer experience and also drive to good sales outcomes. And then we also have a sales systems team that works with other groups within the company to make sure that, for instance, our Salesforce instance has the right fields and that we are having our team spend as little time doing manual billing work, for instance, as possible, and they can really focus on selling.
I'm sorry, I want to make sure I heard you correctly. So your sales enablement team is separate from those folks who directly manage the sales team. So it's separate from your sales managers, because some of the functions you mentioned sound a lot like what sales managers typically have to do, and it's just a whole other job in and of itself, right? So the fact that it sounds like you've broken those two things out is really smart. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. And so, yes, our sales enablement team is part of our sales ops team, right? So our sales ops team has a core ops component, a sales enablement, and then sales systems. Yeah. So I still think that at the end of the day, the team that where the buck stops on rep enablement is sales managers. So I absolutely think sales managers should be held accountable to making sure that their folks are up to speed, ready to sell. And they're the ones that are providing a lot of that real-time coaching, reinforcing new product launches and processes and team meetings, et cetera. However, an overlay group is the sales enablement team that are responsible across our entire sales org to help set the managers up for success. So they work hand in hand with the sales managers on providing training in the areas where, we think that training makes sense. They own a lot of comms out to the field, but then managers reinforce, et cetera. So the way I think about it is sales managers and sales enablement need to be partnered hand in hand. Sales enablement is driving a lot of that stuff at scale, and they're also bringing that kind of cross-functional cohesion to make sure that changes that marketing, product, et cetera, are making make it to our field team. But then at the end of the day, sales managers are really the ones where the buck stops with them on making sure their teams are ready to rock.
I love it. I really do. Because that's I think essential for not only the success and ramping of the individual contributor reps, but as well as those sales managers. That role is so difficult. And a lot of the reason why is because there are these functions that it makes sense for them to be ultimately held accountable for, but that it seems like it'd be almost impossible, right, to keep up with on the day-to-day and do justice to the role of actually coaching the salespeople. So that's a really good one. If y'all are listening, y'all steal that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like that's why, when you want to build out a strategic sales ops org is as you're starting to scale. And you don't want to wait until you're like a 300-person sales org to build out sales ops. You want to build that out at the right time. And when you're a 10-person sales org, you're probably not going to have someone running sales enablement, right? But as you start to have multiple teams, like multiple inbound SDR teams or multiple SMBAE teams, it's like, why have each individual manager create their own homespun onboarding program if you could take the best practices from each of those teams, what's working, and have someone kind of build out a program that can really scale? So it's really sales enablement to me is defined as enabling a team at scale.
Yeah, and it seems like that discipline, as you've kind of carved out, is a really simple way, a really practical way to move away from a lot of the disconnect that sometimes happens between sales and marketing. That seems like that particular role would be a simple way to sort of let them be a bridge between what marketing is doing and how it supports and affects what sales is doing, and keeping the flow of information free between those two disciplines. Do you find that the case at all?
Yeah. And I mean, by the way, I think like we can improve here at Intercom. So I wouldn't say we've nailed this by any means, but yeah, I think like when there's like for instance, PMM is one of the key partners for sales enablement, right? So sales enablement should be a good input to product marketing managers on, hey, like we need a more robust story for how we're better than X competitor. Mm-hmm. And then, sales enablement and PMM can partner on that. And then sales enablement brings that back to the field, right? So there's a lot, I think you've nailed it. There's a lot of partnership between sales enablement and particularly product marketing.
Yeah, I love it. So we've got this, we've got the right team in place, and we very intelligently have figured out, how to segment those folks that we have on the team to make sure that everybody is duly supported on this road to scaling the team. What happens next? What I'm thinking is, I know that it sounds like you hire for a specific kind of culture. In terms of scaling the team, though, where does the ongoing effort to sort of keep that culture up and infuse that, where does that fit into all of this?
Yeah, I think a couple of keys to building culture. So one, pretty early on in my tenure here, I worked with the sales managers and then broader team to create our set of culture tenets. And I think, that was really important because I didn't feel like I could just come in and say, like, here are the 5 cultural tenets we are now going to live by. I think it really has to be something that the whole team embraces and buys into and feels like is the culture we all want to create, right? Like culture can't come from top down.
For sure.
And then we make sure that we, kind of infuse a lot of our cultural tenets into the way we recognize. So when we run Sales All Hands, we make sure that in addition to celebrating top performers, biggest deals, et cetera, we then also recognize people who are embracing change, for instance, which is one of our culture tenets, or are pursuing excellence, someone who is showing up as optimistic, right? And so we make sure that we celebrate and recognize people who are showing up the way we want our team to each and every day. And then, you also have to bring that in the way that you evaluate performance, right? So on our team, we have a performance rating scale, and it's not just about the numbers. We also bring in, how people show up as teammates. And that certainly also factors into our promotion criteria. I think at the end of the day, sales is a very bottom line function, right? Like we care about impact, we care about numbers, and, we care about, sort of that like bottom line component. And so if you have a set of cultural tenets and then but you're willing to promote people or hire people who don't adhere to that culture, then it's going to fall apart really quickly.
For sure.
When rubber meets the road and you're not getting a promotion or you're not getting the performance review score you want because of the way you're showing up, despite the numbers, then I think that becomes very real for people.
Yeah. And I've seen what you're talking about. I mean, those cultures, it's because it's one of the risks that you run right? When you endeavor to hire stone cold killers, right? When you say, I want to go out there and give me some hunters, you get ego. You get people who at other places have been very spoiled, right? And listen, I'm not for nothing. I might be talking about myself. You know what I mean? I might have shown up at a place or two and felt like, listen, as long as I'm, closing at a higher clip than XYZ than the person next to me, then maybe I don't have to be here at 8:15, I'm going to be here at 8:17, 8:20. And that's ugly to say, and I've recovered, thankfully, from that mentality. But you're right. It is something that you have to put into, in a very intentional way, into the performance metrics in order to really drive that home to the types of folks that I might have used to been and that I just described. So I want to make sure that we got all 3 points, though. So it's the way that you hire as far as scaling the team, that it starts there. And then it starts with the very intelligent way that you segmented your sales org to be able to support those folks who you're sort of deploying, especially if you're scaling a big outbound effort. What was the third area of focus that you wanted to impart to us today?
Yeah, I think the third area is really rallying the team around the right priorities. And here at Intercom, we call them rocks. So you can't have a bunch of folks running a bunch of different directions. And I think you got to really help when you have a larger scale sales organization of making sure that everyone is bought into the biggest ways that you want to impact the business. And so, for instance, this year, some of our rocks are around accelerating upmarket momentum. And some of those subcomponents are, again, building out that outbound motion. It's about selling more of our deals annual upfront or on annual contracts, even starting to think about multi-year deals. And it's about enabling a value-based sales process for the right types of customers that are more sophisticated or larger. We also have a rock around being a well-oiled velocity machine. So for the folks on our team that are really helping augment an online buying experience, so kind of our high velocity or like our emerging small business teams, making sure that they have the right processes and tools in place to facilitate the buying process without slowing it down. And then we also have a rock around building out operational foundational excellence. So that, again, speaks to our sales ops organization. So the right sales enablement, the right kind of data insight, and then the right systems. We also have a rock around nailing product launches. So as our product team works really hard to bring exciting new features, functionality, and business impact out there to the world, we want to make sure that we're nailing that narrative and really driving new product dollars to our bottom line. And then we also have a people rock around bringing it each and every day, making sure that we're again, bringing that culture, that we're sharing transparently, career pathing, et cetera. So I think the third component is figure out the biggest needle movers in your business, get buy-in from the right levels. And in our case, that's kind of our leaders and our managers, and then rally the entire org around those things, talk about them in all hands, communicate them via email, keep the team up to date, keep the team excited about the impact that focusing on a subset of initiatives is really going to bring.
I love it to death. I have to tell you, I spend a lot of just over half of the audience and the guests on this show tend to be marketers. And that, along with, like I mentioned at the top of this, just the shift away from the hustle culture that we're seeing, that inflection point that we are in sales, to hear somebody talk about it in such a, I don't know if I want to call it an old school way, but it's kind of an old school way. But it doesn't put a bad taste in my mouth, right? All I'm hearing from you right now is, yes, it's a bottom line organization, and that's not a bad thing. And here's how we make it not a bad thing, right? And it's so totally exciting and so refreshing. I'm so glad that you came on the show today to talk about this. And I have one more quick question. It's just a little segment we do here on the show. Now that I've gotten to successfully pick your brain and see what I could get out of it, now I'd like you, if you would, to tell me something about what you're putting in it. So talk about a learning resource that you've engaged with recently, a book you read, a blog, a podcast, whatever the case, that is either informing your approach or that's just got you excited these days.
Yeah, I am someone that's a big believer in in networking. And so one of the things, as you talk about learning resource, I'm actually in the process of doing is going out to my network. So I'm actually meeting with a few folks this week and next week to just understand how they continue to evolve their segmentation, to ask them how they did some smart testing around what types of prospective customers or existing customers they had owned or not owned by the sales organization, and also just how they thought about kind of career pathing and compensation. So I'm a big believer in actually going out there and talking to folks at different companies who've had similar challenges and understanding how they've solved them to get A, new, fresh ideas, and then B, also just to be able to kind of benchmark and think about where you are relative. You know, if you take something like, hey, what percentage of our deals should be annual upfront in terms of payment terms? Mm-hmm. I want to understand, 5 companies that look like us, what were their targets and goals? How are we lining up against that relative?
For sure. I agree. Listen, people are absolutely a learning resource. Smart people, the people who have done what you want to do, that's one of the best learning resources in my experience in particular. So I'm a fan of you. I will be following along with your success and what you and the folks at Intercom are up to. LB, let the folks out there know how they can connect with you.
Yeah, LinkedIn. So LB Harvey on LinkedIn, and that is absolutely the best way. Send me a message, and I'll get back to you.
Perfect. All right, we'll have to have you on again because I have so many more questions for you, and this was so much fun. But for now, I have to say goodbye. Thank you so much, LB.
Thank you, Nikki. Have a fantastic day, and thanks for the invitation onto the show.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big 3, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.